And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm, and I'm delighted you can join us for our unique podcast community. We're a growing podcast community, so thank you for joining us today. And be sure to hit subscribe on YouTube and hit that bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. We always have new and exciting guests. And on this show, we take you behind the curtain and we explore the most up-to-date and current topics in classical music with some distinguished colleagues. And in my 25 years as a conductor, music director, university professor, artistic consultant, and pretty much anything in the music field, one of my favorite things is the conversations with colleagues and the energy that produces. I always find that sitting down with colleagues, collaborations are born and great things emerge. Great minds get together and we just hash things out, and it always leads to new synchronicity. So today we've got a brilliant young violinist who is going to be one of the world's great violinists coming forward, and we're delighted he's joining us today. So this young man has won the Windsor Festival International String Competition, the youngest violinist ever to do so. He's been a concerto soloist with the Philharmonia Orchestra, the Orchestre Nationale de France, the Royal Northern Symphonia, a whole host of other ones. He's played in Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Denmark, France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Switzerland, and the UK, and across the United States. A very busy recitalist and chamber musician, and he also he's a junior at the Juilliard School studying with Itzhak Perlman and Li Lin. He performs on the famous Ames-Totenberg Stradivari violin, which was made in Cremona in 1734. It is a pleasure to welcome Nathan Meltzer to the show. Welcome, Nathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Nathan, you've been playing the violin you've been in the public eye for a long time, even though you're a young person. Tell us about your growth as an artist, and how did you start to play the violin?
I started when I was 8 years old, which is a little bit of a late start for instrumentalists. A lot of my friends started when, like 3 or 4. But I started because my family at the time, because my parents had just retired. So when I was born in Seattle, a few years later, they were able to retire. And what they tell me is that they wanted to give me and my brothers some culture. And so they had never lived in Europe. And so kind of on a whim and out of curiosity, we moved to Vienna. And when I was living there, the school that I went to had a program for a string orchestra for second graders. So doing that, and it seemed to be a nice social circle to be in. And my dad, when he was a kid for a month in high school, so my parents were kind of pushing me to, do something that had some family history to it, but for practical reasons of saving my young back from carrying a cello up one flight of stairs, I just chose the lightest instrument, also on a whim, really. But I enjoyed playing the violin, and I took to it well, and I took some private lessons with an Irish fiddler who worked in conjunction with the school. And that's how I started. A series of nice coincidences. And when a couple of years later, Josh Bell came to play with the Vienna Phil. So I went to hear that concert, and I thought that was super, super inspiring, of course, because he's an amazing violinist. And when my brothers graduated high school, we were trying to decide where to move back to in the States. We looked up Josh Bell and found that one of his early teachers was a great pedagogue named Mimi Zweig, who taught at IU. So we reached out to her and sent her some videos of me playing and asked if she would be willing to be my teacher. And she said yes. So we moved to Bloomington, where I studied with her for 4 years. And then I went to the Perlman music program, Mr. Perlman's summer program, and that's where I met him. And then the next year, I moved to New York to study with him at the Juilliard Pre-College.
So what does studying with a great in the classical music community like Itzhak Perlman, what does that do to a young artist?
It's a really amazing experience, because rhetoric you hear a lot in the music world is that you have teachers who are great teachers, and you have teachers who are great at giving performance advice as well. And Mr. Perlman is definitely the best of both worlds there. He's been teaching for a long time, and he had wonderful teachers, so he has a great philosophy of teaching. He always talks about teaching like his teacher, Dorothy DeLay, which is very, question-based and process-based, which is really wonderful. But he also has, the means to talk about, the practicalities of performing and, how to project in front of an orchestra and how to pace yourself and things like that. So I get a lot of great information just from his experience. And, if he says something and I struggle to do it, he also plays, which is always possibly the best part of these lessons is just him, demonstrating things. So there's a lot to be gained from that as well. And of course, he's just one of the nicest, most wholesome and humble people I've ever met, which is really amazing for someone of his, caliber and fame and magnitude and everything. So I like to think that I've, I've tried to absorb some of that personality as well, and that warmth and nice qualities.
Well, it's so important to be humble as an artist because it's a very challenging field. We always push ourselves to the possible the limits to what we can do artistically and as a person. And it's great to see the people who have done it before and to take that advice and to channel it into what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had also for the same amount of time I was studying with Mr. Perlman, I've also had a great teacher in Mr. Lee Lin. Who is an incredibly dedicated and focused and really just amazing teacher who's, been like a second father figure to me for these last 6 years at this point. In the transition year between when I was in Bloomington and when I was in New York, I commuted to see him. He was in San Francisco at the time, so every month I would go and had 6 hours of lessons over the weekend and then fly back. So he's also been just absolutely instrumental in everything that is my playing currently. So I'm also just incredibly grateful to him. He's a very different teacher than Mr. P, but they're both completely wonderful.
I've never heard anyone say Mr. P. That's wonderful, and it's great to humanize these amazing artists. I love it. That's fantastic. So tell me, I was on your YouTube channel, and you were a very young man at the time. I forget what the piece, but you had to be 10 or something like that. So someone who's been in the concert eye for so long, tell me what it's like to grow to more challenging repertoire, to grow up in music. What's it like?
It's really interesting to see how approaches to performance for me have changed over the years. When you're younger, you have this certain fearlessness to the way that you perform, and I know I have some videos on YouTube from, I think it was the Halloween concert at the IU String Academy. So I'm dressed in, I have the face paint of a mime, and I'm playing the Eccles Sonata. And there's another video when I did the rock and fiddle challenge, and my brother did this interesting green screen, and there's like the constellations behind me. So I grew up with that brashness and like real fearlessness about performing, which is a really great place to cultivate a love for performing and to learn how to use your performance nerves in very specific ways. And I felt like I had some great resources when I was a kid to learn how to channel that. So I've been able to, keep that going for, kind of most of the performances I still do. I try to maintain that directed energy and focus, and I try to be as fearless as possible. But and as you get older and you're playing this great rep, just learning Brahms concerto, and we were supposed to play together the Beethoven Triple concerto earlier this year, and that unfortunately wasn't able to work out. But it's just there's such an inspiration that comes from the works at this point, and as I'm exploring and what great pieces have been written, and now I'm getting into like chamber music and more contemporary music. That's what propels me through performances now, is just the emotional journeys of these wonderful pieces, and
it's such a challenge. I was really looking forward to that Beethoven Triple because I've done all the Beethoven symphonies. I've done so much of Beethoven's orchestral rep, but that's one that was on my list that I have not done. It was like, I love that piece. I've always wanted to do it, and we had such a wonderful cast of players, including yourself, and hopefully we get to do that again with the Adelphi Orchestra down the road, because it's in this Beethoven year. That would have been a nice cherry on top of that Beethoven cake.
Yeah. It'll happen. We'll get there.
We're in a holding pattern for a bit, but we will come out. We have our first question from the audience. Do you have a favorite concert? This is Eve from New York. Do you have a favorite concert piece to play, and one that maybe you struggle with, that you've had struggle with during your time as a performer? Currently, one of my favorite pieces to perform is the Franck Sonata.
and there's that old wives' tale about what the Franck Sonata represents, because it was written for Eugene Ysaye, the great violinist, allegedly for his wedding present. And so people have looked into the piece as a microcosm of the married life. And this first movement is this really poetic and dreamlike honeymoon phase. And then almost immediately it gets into this dark and tumultuous and stormy second movement. And then the third movement, it's this recitativo, and again, really dreamy. And then it's this really blissful and wonderful and essence of pure joy kind of last movement. So regardless if Franck really meant that as the story of marriage or anything like that, it has a really wonderful arc to perform over the 30 minutes, and to feel the journey from the first moment to the last moment is really, really special. And I was able to play that piece a fair amount last year, and it was each time was a very different experience. So that's one of my favorite pieces that I often concertize with. Also, just any Beethoven quartet, really. The last 6 quartets. I've only had two experiences where I've played one of the entire quartets in one sitting. The first was Opus 132. And I played it with my quartet in high school in a small church in upstate New York, and just a place that sat 30, 40 people, and it was this small intimate space, and that was an amazing experience, because you have that centerpiece third movement that's just it's just amazing. That was another one of my favorite.
I think Beethoven, after writing the Ninth Symphony, and then he retreated from public life and only wrote the string quartets and his late piano sonatas. Purest version of chamber music. After he had done music, the largest music that ever been written before, I think it's kind of amazing. And to do it in a church like that must have been really special. Yeah,
it was really amazing. I did break about 20 bow hairs in that concert. But yeah, because that last movement gets really intense, but it was an amazing experience.
Beethoven said this music, they said a lot of this music is not written for this current age. He was onto something, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to misrepresent this, but I think there's is it a Stravinsky quote that's the late quartets of Beethoven are the only pieces that will forever be contemporary. Louis Spohr said that. Yeah.
Very prophetic.
It's definitely still true. Yeah.
Very prophetic. Yeah. So I have another question. We have another question from our audience. This is Jack from New Jersey. He asks, you've performed in so many different places. What's it like to perform for different audiences in different countries? What do you find from the audience as you travel and concertize?
Everywhere I've gone, I've always had a very lovely audience. Sometimes you hear stories of certain audiences will treat you with a little colder than others, and some will be kissed. But I've always, had a lovely experience with audiences. I love playing in big halls. Of course, I've played Paganini Concerto at the Berlin Philharmonic Hall a couple of years ago, and did a series of concerts. I guess it was 2 years ago at this point in France with the Cacciatorian Concerto. And the last one of those concerts was at the Philharmonic in France, in Paris. So, of course, playing in those kind of halls and feeling just in the Philharmonic halls, there are the surround audiences where they're sitting all around you. And so that's a really interesting, to feel the energy coming from all around you. But I also really love, playing in rooms, really, where the audience is right in front of you, and you can really, in a much more personal way, sense how they're reacting to the music and how they're feeling. Like I was saying, Franck Sonata, you can really feel the way that the audience's mood changes throughout the piece. So that's something I always is going to those, either in churches, or I've played a few concerts in Ischia, a small of Naples in Italy, where William Walton spent the last years of his life, and there's a music festival that happens there, at the Walton Gardens, and that room is the room where he was, composing the last years of his life, and it's very small and very intimate, and it's, surrounded by 3 acres of beautiful garden.
There's
So
something special about the
that
ghosts in
excites.
those places that they hold that music, and you get to just tap into the ether. It's beautiful. It's very poetic. So
Yeah,
tell me
no,
about what
it's really,
percentage
really
of your
special.
time is spent performing concerto versus chamber music versus quartet. Give me an idea of your performing menu.
Um, Most chamber music stuff is reserved for the summer. My summer this summer is well, this summer is no chamber music, but it was supposed to I was supposed to start at the Pro Music Workshop, and then go to the Chamber Fest Cleveland, run by Frank and Diana Cohen, which is a really wonderful group of people. And I was supposed to be at Toronto Festival right now, and then the Moritzburg Festival in Germany, run by Jan Vogler. So I was supposed to have a nice summer lined up of chamber music stuff, and that's how the last couple summers have been. Over the years, over the school year, that is. Um, it's every couple of months I'll go on tour and play with a wonderful orchestra, but most of the time it's doing recitals. Like the thing in Italy. I do a fair amount of things around New York and around the States, and so it's I would say about 70% recitals, 30% orchestral gigs. But those are always orchestral concerts are more draining for me. I can I have a nice time just playing recital after recital, but there's a reverence that I have towards playing with orchestras that requires that I space them out a little
Requires a
bit.
lot of energy to
Yeah.
get there and to do the entire concerto. And as a conductor, I just love
Yeah.
doing concerto work because it's I have to listen to you and the orchestra and feel it's this combination. It's so exciting for the audience to feel the virtuoso doing their interpretation with the orchestra, and it's such beautiful. It's chamber music on the most massive scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question from
And
Tobias from New York. Have you ever performed atonal music, and what is your attitude towards it?
atonal music. The atonal music that I'm most comfortable with is Bartok. I performed a fair amount of Bartok. I really love his all of his works. Really, I connect most with his quartets because that's what I grew up with. Um, but his first Rhapsody is a really great piece. And last year at Juilliard, we played Miraculous Mandarin with Barbara Hannigan conducting, and that was always that was a real treat. Um, so yeah, I really love the music of Bartok. My girlfriend is a composer, so I've recently, in the last year and a half, been exposed to a whole nother realm of not just atonal music, but like experimental music and music that really stretches the boundaries of what it means to play an acoustic instrument. And so I'm getting really familiar with that and really interested in that kind of music as well.
I look
Um,
forward to seeing where those experiments go because it's so interesting to take virtuosos and to give you something different completely, and it's going to look like Yo-Yo Ma's done in his career, how
yeah,
he's expanded the boundary of what's possible in his instrument. I think that something to
yeah,
think about as
definitely.
you developed into this concert artist of the highest caliber.
Mm. Oh, yeah. No, it's been a super great experiment. We've been, Hannah and I have been collaborating on a handful of works in these last couple months. So we've had a lot of conversations about, combating my general tendency to, shape things in the way that, when you practice your etudes and play your concertos and sonatas, there's a general, vernacular to standard repertoire classical music. And so we've been talking a lot about altering that and like looking beyond that and like really, experimenting with what it means to play something beautifully. Um, and so that's just been really interesting for me. Very
And it's
challenging, but
always
very
it's always
interesting.
great to work with composers because if a piece is being written for you, you're the first to bring it to life. You can do things that we're not bound by 150 or 200 years of performance practice.
Mm,
So you're really
yeah.
unchained in that way, a way that's never been done before. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
We have a question
Yeah.
from the audience. Has your girlfriend ever written any music for you?
Yes, she's so I think we're at piece number 4 at this point. So I've been here in Pittsburgh for 4 months at this point. I was it was I played Brahms Concerto in Charlotte during Juilliard spring break. And I was supposed to do the gala concert at the Longy School at one of their halls at Harvard, and that concert got canceled. And so I immediately, texted Hannah that like, oh, I can come visit you in Pittsburgh for a few days before school starts. And I get here, and then the next day, Juilliard sends out the email that the rest of the semester was canceled and that we need to move out of the dorms. And yeah, so I've just been, bunkering here since then, which has been really wonderful. And yeah, so we've had several instances at this point to write solo violin pieces. The first of which was a event that Jan Vogler organized back in March. His Music Never Sleeps 24-hour live stream. That was the first piece that Hannah had written for me. It was called A Falling Upon. And so I performed that for that event and for an event associated with the Windsor Festival a couple months later. And then again for Jan's radio show, Never Sleeps, which was on W. And then after that, the next one we did was actually just a couple weeks ago. One of my colleagues based in California is organized a concert series called Mosaics of the Bay, which is commissioning composers to write works that are based on art pieces that were submitted by contemporary artists, and then getting soloists to play those pieces. And so Hannah wrote a piece on a wonderful painting entitled Dorothy. So yeah, that was a super interesting experience to write a piece that was based on another piece and try to bring all of those layers together.
I love cross-artistic pollination. That is great stuff and really interesting. How would you describe the style of the music? Was it polytonal? Was it tonal? Was it...
I'm not sure I could call it polytonal. And Hannah generally doesn't, I don't want to speak for Hannah, but she is definitely always experiments with everything she can. But she loves thinking about different kinds of sound. And so there were, aspects of the piece that, depending on, she tried to write it in a way that followed the way that you're visually attracted to different parts of the painting. Which I think is a really brilliant way of thinking about it. So that the structure of the piece was based on which colors pop out at you first, and going along that way. And so, depending on the section of the painting, some parts of it were very tonal, and some parts of it were, very open sonorities, a lot of fourths and fifths and open strings and harmonics. And then parts of it were very much not tonal. So that piece really was a wonderful.
To be a composer today, you have to come to terms with the past, with the Stravinskys and the Beethovens, of course, and then find your own voice. What a fascinating collaboration between two people. Yeah,
and it's always great. With that piece, when we were first talking about what the painting meant to us, it was as we were making shakshuka. So it's been a really wonderful time being here.
So tell me about, let's shift gears a little bit. Tell me about your attitude towards practicing. How do you balance your life with practicing?
At Juilliard, where I am now, and it was different in high school because I went to a rather intense high school, and so a lot of I didn't have much free time outside of going to school and then practicing and then doing all my physics homework and philosophy homework and whatnot. But nowadays at school, I try to keep it to 3 to 4 hours of practice, which is when I was in high school I did about 6, which I can definitively say is too much practicing. Don't practice that much. But now when I'm where I'm surrounded by musicians and I'm constantly either in orchestra or in chamber music, I really try to balance out that kind of playing with, with being in the lab and going over things. I think it's very important to have that balance and not to overwhelm yourself with just your technical practicing. Um, I, have been learning to consider sight reading as a form of practicing, as a very valuable form of practicing. And so I, in the last couple of years, do a huge amount of that with, a certain group of friends that we love to, play quartets together. And, Debbie's quartet is one of our favorites to read. And of course, all the Beethovens. Borodin is a guilty pleasure of mine. Um, I try to have a nice balance of technical work and then more intense collaborative work, and then fun collaborative work in those sight reading sessions.
Luis from New Jersey asked, do you have any funny stories in your practicing routines or anything that comes to mind as being a funny story?
A funny story. Um,
I'll give you one. While we were working, my cat jumped on the table and tried to derail the entire podcast. 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, Hannah has a dog, has a wonderful 14-year-old cockapoo named Toby. And so I've had I've had to relocate where I practice several times because he gets very lonely. And so if Hannah is off doing something, I can't be upstairs practicing because he'll get sad. So I have to go downstairs and practice with him, so that he still knows that we're there for him, and so he'll be pawing at my leg. And every time earlier in the quarantine session, I decided to challenge myself and learn the Last Rose of Summer, because it's a piece that's way out of my comfort zone, and so I figured no one's going to hear me for a while. This is a good time to learn this piece, and so I could tell that Toby was very upset when I was in the early stages of practicing that, because there are a lot of harmonics that weren't speaking, and so that was irritating him. Um, but yeah, Toby's a wonderful little
That's
puppy.
a great story. So tell me the instruments you've played in your journey. So tell me how does the changing of instruments affect the violinist, and bring us current on the instrument you're playing now, which has got an incredible history, and I look forward to chatting about that with you.
Yeah, so the violin I'm playing right now is the wonderful 734 Stradivarius, the Ames Totenberg Strad, which, as you said, has a really incredible history. It was, played by the great violinist and pedagogue Roman Totenberg for 20 some years, and after a recital and all played at the Longy School in Cambridge, where he taught, one of his previous students, when Professor Totenberg was out, schmoozing with the audience members, snuck in the back hall and stole the instruments, and then disappeared for 30 years. And so after that student died, which was a year after Professor Totenberg died, he told his then girlfriend when he was on his deathbed that there's this super valuable instrument lying under a tarp in my basement. Go try to sell it and get some money. And so she found it, and she didn't know what it was. She wasn't a musician, so she took it to a luthier, who called the FBI, and called Preet Braha, actually, which is something I find fun. And so yeah, the violin was returned to Professor Totenberg's three daughters, who gave it to a wonderful shop in New York called Rare Violins, run by Steve and Bruno Price and Ziv Razi. And the violin was in their custody for a couple of years, being restored, because when you steal a Strad, you can't exactly take it to a shop when a seam opens or something goes wrong, and so the violin was covered in just super glue from when the guy had to glue his own seams. So they had to take it apart and clean all that off and repolish everything, and it was a really tough job, and they did a wonderful job of it. 2 years ago, it was finally ready to be performed, and Rare Violins decided that they were going to start their own Strad Society-like organization called In Consortium that lends out fine violins to performers. And so this violin was the first violin that came out in that foundation. And I've been playing it for a little under 2 years at this point, which is really hard to believe.
How does the instrument change your sound? Describe it, like, to people who may not be concert violinists. Describe what it's like to play an instrument like that. It has such a history and a Provence, and how does that affect your playing?
Specifically about this violin, I've played on a few Del Jesus throughout my time for specific concerts. But I've never had the opportunity to like really sit with a great violin like this and listen to it develop, and listen to hear the difference between how it started and then as I get used to it and as it gets used to me, hear that's and specifically with this violin, since it was out of commission for so long and then in separate pieces for so long, there's been a really tangible difference between what it sounds like now and how it sounded when I first got it. And while it was still an amazing, beautiful sound when I got it, it's, every couple of months, something clicks with it and something else just opens up or something starts speaking or something gets this deeper resonance to it. So on top of just like me learning how to play it, and the violin getting used to how I play it, because for these violins, they really do change depending on who's playing them, because they resonate in different ways and they get used to resonating that in certain ways. So violins really normally change depending on who's playing them. But with this one, it's really, really been altering really drastically, which has been an absolute joy. One of Professor Totenberg's daughters lives in New York, and so she goes to I invite her to every concert I do there. And she always comments, not to put words in her mouth, that every time she hears it, the violin starts sounding better and more like what she remembers it sounding when she was a kid, which is always just a wonderful compliment to hear.
It's an incredible story, and incredible to hear that his daughter. I mean, it must have been devastating for Professor Totenberg to lose that instrument, which becomes a part of you. That's like your partner for so many years. It must have been devastating for him.
Yeah, what he often said was that he equated it to losing an arm, and because he had been playing it for 20 years, and I think what he said is that he finally understood it for the last 7 years when he was playing it, and so it took him 13 years to get used to it, and then must have been really, really difficult, but he sprung back and was always the nicest guy and a great person to be around, and so he recovered nicely, and kudos to him for that.
We have a question from Sylvia from New Jersey. What kind of strings do you currently use on the Strad, and what kind of bow are you using?
So I use Peter Renfeldt's for the bottom three strings, and then a Jaeger medium for the E string, which I think it's a really nice set of strings. I try not to get too caught up in accessories when I'm playing. So this is actually the first set of strings that I tried on the instrument, and it sounded good, and I at the shop decided that sounds good, and I decided it sounds good. But I haven't really experimented with different strings. You hear that dominant sound great on old violins, but so I'll try that at some point. But I think this is a really nice setup. And the bow is actually also from Rare Violins. It was not custom made for me, but it was made by their resident bow maker, Ron Forrester. And so I was playing on a wonderful bow that was on loan to me from Juilliard, because they have a fine instrument and bow collection. But Bruno Price at Rare Violins wanted to see what this violin sounded like on one of their bows, because Mr. Forrester is a really amazing bow maker who's really detail oriented in how it feels for people of different arm lengths, and he makes slightly different size bows and bow weights depending on the instrument and how big of a person you are, and so they had something that they thought would really work for this instrument, and so It did. So I'm still playing on that bow. I'm the first person to ever play on it. It's 2 years old,
So a modern
and it's a
bow and
wonderful thing.
a and an ancient violin making great music together. That's a really interesting, cool story. How
Yeah.
much for people who may not know, how much maintenance does a 1732 Stradivarius require?
It depends on the violin. I know that Mr. Perlman um, famously only changes his strings like once a year, and occasionally will take the violin in just to see if anything has opened up, which it generally hasn't. This violin, I'm since it's new to the music scene again, requires slightly more maintenance than usual, and as time passes, I definitely have to take care of it less and less. But last year, seems to open up, about every 5 weeks, and now it's to the point where like every 3 months I'll take it in, um, as it gets used to resonating again. So it really depends on the instrument, and this one is settling into a routine.
Now, who played it before? Maestro Totenberg played it. Who played it before? What's the? It's such a long performing history. Was there a famous soloist before that as well?
Actually, I'm actually not sure. Um, Presumably Ames was a great performer if he got the instrument named after him. But I'm actually not sure who played on the instrument before him.
Well,
But he was probably
if these
great.
instruments could talk, what an incredible lineage of people coming down from the 1700s all the way to
Yeah.
today, as you start taking the stage at these major venues with that incredible instrument. So tell me what
Yeah.
what was your life, a typical week in the life of Nathan Meltzer before COVID-19, and how has that shifted now?
Well, a typical week was, I'm still in school, and so it was that combination of, a couple hours of classes in a day, and depending on the week, a 3-hour orchestra session, or, a certain amount of chamber music rehearsals. I play in a quartet with three wonderful musicians who all have very intense performance schedules. And so we we have a joke that our most of our rehearsals take place in the hour before our coachings, because one of us is gone at all times. Um, so I can't say I spend a lot of time in those rehearsals, but when they do happen, it's always a real treat. Um, so yeah, I try to, what we were talking about before, that balance of spending a fair amount of time practicing, spending time in lessons, but most of my free time is spent sight reading, um, and I enjoy playing ultimate frisbee, and so sometimes my friends and I will go to Sheep's Meadow and play a game of pickup frisbee.
Fun.
Um, yeah, it's a low risk sport, if you know what a catch anything, and my brother was a baseball player, and so he got arm problems. Um, so yeah, none of those strenuous sports, just a piece of plastic. Um, yeah, so that would be a general week. Um, and then yeah, a lot of sight reading, a lot of rehearsing. Nowadays, well, it's very different. Juilliard has recently announced their schedule. Um, it looks like a great plan. Classes are still going to be online for most of next semester. Um, but right now, a general work week is kind of just making some bagels, practicing some etudes and some scales. I'm currently in the early stages of putting together a concert series, an online concert series. So I've been doing a lot of administrative work for that, coming up with programs, writing emails, um, and reaching out to performers. That's Yeah, a lot of meetings around that, which has been very difficult, but of course very rewarding, and I'm I'm very coming up with.
You learn so
Yeah.
much by producing these new things, and you're going to learn skills that you never knew you had. That's the interesting thing about these times, is
Yeah.
everyone's doing things differently. What we've done before in the past has had to change. So, and I'm finding on this show particularly, I found that a lot of my colleagues are doing such interesting things. From one opera singer who's formed her own opera company that's doing virtual concerts, for another one who's find humor and has become a YouTube sensation. The toilet paper diva, my friend Christina Major, who puts on this headdress and got over 1 million views on Facebook Live, and
Wow.
great singer, but finding humor. And it's just amazing what people can come up with in this time as we are all forced into new times. So tell me about this concert series. What's it? What's the thrust of the music, and what are you working on?
Yeah, so it's a couple of my colleagues at Juilliard, Devin Moore and Louis, a fantastic violist and cellist respectively. We're co-creating a collaboration with University, who's the founder of the Institute of Composer Diversity. And so we're putting together a series of what we're calling asynchronous concerts, of socially distant performed chamber music of works of composers of underrepresented communities. And so, we're reaching out to a bunch of contemporary composers, and, getting all those, sync licensing and trying to put together as many different combinations of instrumentation as possible. We're starting out with a bunch of solo rep just because we don't want to overwhelm our post-production department. But as we get into it, we're hoping to really, get some, on top of just high-level performance, some really interesting visual ways of sharing this wonderful music that's not widely performed. And I've had a really wonderful time. For people who don't know, the Institute of Composer Diversity is a really wonderful platform. It's an online catalog that's incredibly easy to use, rich in detail, of just every composer that's of an underrepresented community. And so I've had a really wonderful time just like researching and in my efforts to try to put together learning a lot about these different composers and hearing their music. For those pieces into other projects that I'm doing. I'm putting together a concert for the Toronto Music Festival right now, and so I'm going to be playing one of Jesse Montgomery's pieces for solo violin, and which is a really wonderful piece, and I hadn't been aware of it a week ago, and now it's been a really wonderful experience in learning that.
That's so exciting to bring the works of underrepresented composers forward. Such an important in today's society as we bring new voices into classical music. I think it's really, really important what you're doing there, and that's exciting. How can people find out more about that?
We're still in the very early stages of this. I wish I could say give you a website to go look up. That's currently what we're working on. We finally came up with a name 3 hours ago, after 10 days of going back and forth and trying to alter some words. We're going with Opus Illuminate, because the main what we're trying to accomplish with this is really shine a light, illuminate works that generally aren't in the classical music canon right now, and to provide an interesting platform for people to experience these works, because normal chamber music is not really something we can do right now. Normal concerts are something we can really do right now. So we're trying to in this platform of free asynchronous concerts of social distant chamber music, it's just visually a very interesting thing to see chamber music that's just for people in different boxes. And I really enjoy looking at that. I've enjoyed doing several of those projects in the last couple months, and so I think it's just a very interesting platform for people to witness this music.
So who goes first?
To...
Who puts down their track first that you perform with?
It's either a metronome, depending on the piece, either a metronome or a one of the extremities, the first violin or the cello. It's always nice. I've enjoyed starting with the cello just because that,
Foundation.
it's the foundation, and that's not as important when everything's digital, but it's remnants of, how
Our
things
tradition
go
and our history.
in live
Yeah,
music. Yeah.
I'm buried in doing a weekly virtual choir with recordings with a very large choral community down here. Every week we're putting out 60, 70, 80 member recordings. And it's always the organ for us, but then I'm adding brass instruments. And it's just interesting to add those complexities to asynchronous performance. And we have to, the editing process is so different than what a conductor normally would do. But it's... we keep communities engaged. We keep people excited about music, and it's very important work you're doing. I'm glad to hear that you're doing such creative work, even in your time as you're adapting to this new normal.
Yeah, really, trying to do my best, and I think as artists, we really have a singular ability to just reflect the times that we're living in, and so in these projects that I was doing before, when I was trying to, I've been doing a few of these asynchronous chamber music social distancing before, and as I was thinking about trying to, which rep should we do for our next project, I was thinking, this is really a time where people have gotten. This is a really great opportunity because it's a different way of consuming music to really change more things about the music experience, as opposed to trying to equate as much as possible. And even though people have been used to hearing Beethoven quartets live, let's try to do a asynchronous recording of a Beethoven quartet. And while that was still really rewarding to me, I was trying to find something that was that could be even more useful in a time like this. And so hopefully this project will work out and a resource to people.
So Nathan, how can people find out more about you?
Well, I have a website, nathanmeltzer.com. And so, there you can see several, performance videos and my calendar and, repertoire lists if you're looking to see what I can play, or have played. And I have I have YouTube videos up dating back for basically as long as I've been playing, and so I have a fun time watching the evolution of my social media content, because I've had that YouTube channel for a while, and so one of my oldest videos is that video where I'm dressed as a mime, and one of my more recent videos is me playing on the Totenberg Strad, and so that's I like having that juxtaposition in there.
You have a great personality, and it comes through in your music making, and I look forward to watching you continue to grow, and to doing some great things in this music field. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes.
Thank you for joining Music Matters 2020. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. Be sure to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel and hit that bell for more information. Our next guest will be this Sunday at 2 o'clock p.m., a 2 o'clock start, because our guest is calling in from Vienna. This is Ray Chenet, the acclaimed countertenor who's been taking Europe by storm, who's going to talk about his life in COVID and how he's moving forward. And you can also support us by joining our Patreon page at patreon.com/mm2020. Anyone who joins gets a t-shirt, and thank you so much to people we sold our first 20 t-shirts, very exciting. And be sure to keep involved with us and to reach out to us with any questions. And remember, keep music alive. Thank you.